We're talking about growth, and you had some very special quotes that you said would be appropriate for
Well, they're meaningful to me, and they're kind of funny in a way. The one that I think means the most, Isaac Stern, who was really the savior of Carnegie Hall, and one of the world's greatest violinists, said at one time, "I want to die young and delay it as long as possible." So how many people do you know who are already old when they're young? They're not interested in learning, they're not interested in growing, they know what they know. The other one is Satchel Paige, and I saw Satchel Paige pitch for the Cleveland Indians. He looked like he was 90 years old, but I'm sure he was like 40 or 50 or 60. And he said, "How old would you be if you didn't know how old you were?" Because sometimes we kind of get old, and old is kind of relative to life. I mean, I've known a lot of really young people who are already old. And I knew a really young person, and he had very, very few moments to live, and that was Fred Fennell. Fred was young all of his life, up to the very end. He was 90 years old and still young. And that's the way to be. Living life, growing constantly. Because I think in some ways that's the secret. Staying young and growing is a great combination.
I'm not going to let this go by because Dr. Mangini was talking about it last night. You're young, you're driven, you've had a career, you're on the second career, you're still driven. When I was at your house, there's the dogs, Kristen's running, the cars are going full. I mean, there's so much life. What drives you? What is that thing that goes every morning? I'm up and at 'em, ready to go. Let's get some stuff done.
I'm not always up and at 'em ready to go. But I enjoy life. I enjoy living. I enjoy people. I really love music. I mean, I listen to music. I don't listen to band music, I got to say. And the reason, it's not like I don't like band. I love band music. But I don't listen to band music because I know too much about it. I know that we keep talking about the E-flat clarinet and piccolo and oboe and so forth, trying to tune, but we've all been there. So we know when this thing happens, and oh boy, they did that great, and oh, they did this great. Now here comes this hard part, for the euphonium. Oh, that's okay, and then this hard part for the bassoon and so on. If you know too much about it, you're sort of sucked into the technique of it. So I spend most of my time listening to string quartets and opera and violin sonatas, and I don't know how hard they are. I don't know how hard it is, and I don't care. I want to know the music. And I think that is the issue of, are we going to talk about this final element now or later?
You're right on it. Go for it. We can put it anywhere.
There's one level that bands have not gotten to. We play great. The bands are better than ever right now. There was no golden age of band where the bands play better than they do right now. But what we're missing is we don't make music the way the rest of the world does. We make music for perfection's sake, or too many of us do. The rest of the world makes music to bring it alive. I had a brochure, it's probably still in my briefcase, about a guy who was subscribing to the Chicago Symphony who said, "I love to go to the Chicago Symphony because the music just turns me on and I find myself crying." Now that's the way we should be making music, so our listeners feel that way. When you listen to a pop singer or a jazz player, well, let's take a couple of really wild examples. Louis Armstrong. When Louis Armstrong sang, have you anybody heard Louis Armstrong sing? He was a pretty miserable singer, except that the music was there. It wasn't like you were listening to the tone, his dulcet tones. You were listening to the music. And I also never thought that Miles Davis, the great jazz trumpet player, I never thought he was a very good trumpet player. I think playing the trumpet was not what he did well, but making music is what he did well. He was a great music maker, and that's what we're missing. That's our final element. That's our final hurdle, is getting to the music. And I feel we're on the verge of it. But as long as we keep saluting skill and we keep saluting perfection, we're going to miss out on the music. Enough.
Good. These people who've been wonderful about being with us all morning, I know have some questions, and so we're going to stump the band here, so to speak. And
I'll just say I don't know.
That's fine, and they'll just pass it. Who would like to be first? Not everybody can do it at one time. So, okay, here you go, Bobby. And then whoever you need to pass it to, Bobby, will be great. And just stand up there.
First of all, thanks for talking with us today. I've really already learned more than I was bargaining for when I first came in. Being a teacher, I've taught for 8 years now and still sort of on the backside of learning that. Could you speak to maybe some lessons that you learned in the early part of the career, the middle part of the career, and in the part of the career that you're in now? What were kind of some of those differences between those three different transitional places?
The early part of my career, I realized that I had to know a lot about skills. I felt I needed to know about the oboe, about the bassoon, about how to tie a cymbal knot. I mean, all the idiosyncrasies. I mean, I needed to know because that's what my students needed to know. And so it was a combination of that and trying to bring the music to them. I still feel this way, and it's never left me. It used to be worse than it is now, and that is choosing music. Choosing music is one of the most difficult things your entire life. Now, as you get older, you get more knowledgeable about the music, so technically it gets easier. The real trick about that early on is that we are music, in my estimation, can express the entire spectrum of human feelings and experience, anywhere from the most gentle and fragile on one hand to the most grotesque or animalistic on the other hand. So we've got the most gentle and fragile. This will prove that I'm not an artist. Mm-hmm. Okay? Okay, so we've got gentle over here, and the music is all the way through this. And this was one of my biggest challenges early on, was picking the right music. And the issue is that we are also, as individuals, along this line. So we are either a little bit more gentle, or we're a little bit more, so music appeals to us that goes, whoa, whoa, that feels good to do that. Or it feels good to go, oh, oh. And so we put ourselves in here, or maybe in here. So that's where we are, and it's good to know where you are, because what happens so often is that you make the music into your personality as opposed to making your personality into the music. It's the same thing with actors. So picking a couple of actors, two Roberts, Robert Redford and Robert De Niro. Robert Redford, we all know. Every time Robert Redford's in a movie, I want to go see it because I know what I'm going to get. I'm going to get Robert Redford. He nearly always plays Robert Redford in some shape or other. Now, Robert De Niro, I never know who I'm going to get. I mean, he could be a comedian and evil, back to back. So Robert Redford is who we need to be as conductors. Robert De Niro is who we need to be as conductors. We need to adjust ourselves to the music rather than adjust the music to ourselves. I went on too long about that one thing early on, but that bothered me a lot in the beginning of choosing the music. Getting out of the norm was my middle problem. I was successful at doing certain things, so I kept doing them. And then I found that I was getting bored because there wasn't enough creativity and so forth involved in it. At the end, it's being how do I put this? We did a recording with a professional group I had 2 or 3 years ago of the Mozart Grand Partita, this piece that's come up several times. And I felt I could only really make the kind of music with that piece that I wanted to make after I was 70 years old. The music demanded so much of me, and I felt I was somewhere on the way. I still feel I haven't arrived at that, but you feel like you've got to grow into certain kinds of music. So the challenge of learning the score to the Berg Chamber Concerto, or learning Stravinsky, or moving on to the next level of bringing that to the students, that's something at the end. You can't get complacent at the end. You can't just keep doing what you're doing, because then you become one of those band conductors who everybody's waiting to retire. How long does old Reynolds have before he's done? I mean, that's the question that so many people have of all of us. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Good. Next.
I'm just so thrilled to be here and listening to all the wisdom that you have. You had mentioned about intonation, and those of us who are in high school, our biggest problems is tone and intonation. I know a lot of teachers that I work with use the electronic tuners.
Yep.
Is that something that you feel is good? What are some tips that you might want to give and impart some knowledge on how we can talk about intonation and keep it going within our schools and our groups?
Okay. Well, the electronic tuner, I think, is really great, especially for establishing the same pitch every day in the rehearsal. I don't think it's so good to keep tuning to that during the rehearsal. And I'm not a big advocate of spending a lot of time tuning up. I'm much more of an advocate of really spending more time tuning during the rehearsal. And 90% of tuning is somebody's ability to predict the next pitch they're going to play. Only about 10% of tuning is the adjustment after they're on it. Most of it is, I hear that next pitch. And so I would do, and it goes along with sound, with the tone, I would do some chorales, or something chorale-like every day. It doesn't have to be a chorale, but it could be this Wagner Trauer music we talked about, or a movement from William Byrd's suite, or something that would be chorale. So their technical demands on them are so limited that they can give all of their concentration to listening and tuning. And then the other thing I would do is sing. Sing as much as possible. And junior high kids will do it. The high school kids won't want to do it. So it's just the way it is. But I would, still in high school, I would try to do it and have them play the chorale, and then maybe have the first chair players play and everybody else hum, because when you're humming, people don't know whether you're really singing or not, and so it's not as embarrassing. But I would try to get them into the mode of that. And when you're singing, like sing a chord, I mean, let's hear the last chord of this piece. Now sing the note you've got. And they'll go, woo, and they won't find the note. And they'll play it again, they'll sing it again. And once you get on that road to singing it, and they have an idea on that, they'll do better. I also think that singing is really good in the tuning up process. When I do honor bands and so forth, and if I went back and did a high school band, I would do the electronic tuner with the same pitch every day, and then I'd have people sing that note. Because if they get it in their ear, then they're tuning to themselves rather than tuning to an external source. If an oboe or clarinet or somebody plays an A or a B flat or whatever you tune to, it's really hard for the tuba player to tune to that. Or if you tune to the tuba, it's hard for the flute player to play in tune with that. But if they sing that note to themselves, and nearly always people will sing it right together in tune, then there's a much greater chance. But I think the chorales would do it. I worked with chorales with my high school group in trying to get them to play loudly very well. That's one of the most difficult things to do in a rehearsal, is to get that strength of sound that is not strident or edgy or overdone, and still get it strong. And the same thing is true on the downside. But chorales work because they can hear the pitch, and they can also, the difficulty of the music is not so great that they can't concentrate on all the other things. Does that have any help at all? Okay.
Thank you for talking about the difference between rehearsing the technical aspects of music and rehearsing the music for, exploring what the music wants to say. My associate director and I have been talking about this a lot for the last few weeks, and we're discussing for next year's programs how to approach this with less focus on the technical aspects. Could you talk to the directors that might not just be able to approach their band and start directing their attention to the music, because maybe not all of the students will attend to the technical aspects on their own? Do you approach the technical things at the same time as the musical shapes of the music, or is there an order that you approach these things?
I don't use an order, and I do believe strongly that both happen at the same time. Maybe not at the same instant. I mean, you work on some music and then some technique, or the technique is getting in the way. There's a wrong note or a bad intonation you have to solve, and then you go right back to the music. So, because they will be sensitized to what you are sensitizing them to. So if you're working on musical phrasing or the feeling of the music, or you just say, saxophones, I would like you to play inside the sound of the French horns. So they become sensitized to that kind of thing. Then the whole sensitivity factor is winding up, because you're either sensitizing them or desensitizing them. And so I would hate to go back to picking music again, but I would pick most of the music would be well within their capability, with maybe one piece a real stretch, technically. But they can't really play really musically if they're spending 90% of their energy trying to solve the technical demands of the piece. It's only when the piece is a little bit easier, and then you have to really be careful to select mature sounding pieces. If you've got a really great high school band, you can't play Go Tell Aunt Rhody. Otherwise they're going to say, oh, crying, we played this in junior high, But you can work on easier things with a greater degree of expectation from them, and you can bring them into this. You can bring them in. Now, this piece seems to be going here, or should this, as we talked earlier, should this be a crescendo here, a diminuendo here? Then make it a kind of a community thing, so they feel they're a part of doing this. Is that enough on that? I don't.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Anybody else?
Since I've known you, you've had just a tremendous passion for folk music. And some of the moments that I've had with you, Colonial Song and Lincolnshire Posy, there's been an intimacy with your art and that of Percy Grainger that words can't even express. Can you tell us a little bit about your interaction and thoughts of Percy Grainger?
Well, that music really speaks to me. A lot of music really speaks to me, but that speaks to me, and in large degree, it speaks to me because you can do it so many different ways. I have recordings of Percy Grainger playing piano and recording a piece with a band, and they're completely different. So it's got a lot of possibilities in it, a lot of imagination and creativity with the scoring, with the style, and so forth. So you've got an enormous amount of potential to make music. You're just not playing the notes on the page. So then you have to bring yourself into that. How do I feel this should go at this point? And I don't always do those pieces the same way every time. So Percy Grainger is a guy with a lot of creativity. He's also a person who stated uncategorically that he thought one of the greatest evils in music was the saluting of skill. Felt that skill got in the way of music making. And he quoted, the great violinist Joachim, who Brahms wrote his violin concerto for, was not the greatest technician, but when he made music at the deepest possible level. And Grainger was that way with the piano. He was Grieg's favorite interpreter of the Grieg piano concerto. So, the Grainger music is very special indeed. And it's one of those, whoops, I should have erased this. This is a depth chart, okay? And on this depth chart, this is us and this is the music. So we are here, let's say we're here. This is the deepest possible, most significant musician we could possibly be. But this is where we are today, on our way to becoming a deeper musician. And this is the music. This is Irish Tune from County Derry. Now, if we were here, we would be able to interpret the piece to that level. It would sound nice, it would sound pretty, but somebody at this level would be able to get much more meaning and depth from that piece. The same piece of music. Because Irish Tune is capable of going here. That's about as deep as you can take that piece. Now, the slow movement of Mahler's Ninth Symphony is capable of here. But if we're still here, then we're interpreting Mahler's Ninth Symphony, then this is where Mahler's Ninth Symphony will come out. So you're trying to get yourself at the deepest possible level by conducting the most significant music. And I think Granger's music has a lot of great potential for that. But if you're here, who do we want to put here? Carlos Kleiber, Giulini, any of the great interpreters. And you are conducting instant concert, which is about right there. Then that's all the deeper you go. No matter how deep you are, you can only go to the depth of the music. So just choose the music that has the most potential, and you've picked some great stuff.
You spoke earlier about the differences between world music and American band approach to music. Can you talk a little bit about comprehensive musicianship and your thoughts about trying to incorporate, especially in schools that may not have a lot of music theory classes or music technology or music history or anything like that? Do you have any thoughts on how to incorporate them, or do you think it's important? Anything along those lines?
I think it's really important. I think anything you could do to educate the individuals in music is really good. Therefore, the more they can do with composition, with improvisation, all of the comprehensive music things, that they're just going to help it be better. The way to have a better band is to have better individuals. And this is one significant way to do that. I mean, there are other ways too. You can do chamber music and solos and private lessons and so forth. But that deals usually a lot with the technique of it. What you're talking about, the comprehensive musicianship, deals with the musical concepts of broadening the individual as a musician. Then they're going to bring more to the party with the rehearsal. So if you're on this track of the comprehensive musicianship and so on, I think you're on the right track, because you're bringing the broadest possible musical education to the people in your ensemble. And that's your responsibility. Responsibility is beyond having a good band.
Glenn?
As a conductor, we're always trying to pick the best programs and literature for our students at various ranges of experience. How do you choose from some of the new music that is out there? We've all probably had experiences where you pick a piece of music because it's been recommended by colleagues, or you think it sounds like something you'd like to try, and then maybe it doesn't become the piece that you thought it would with your group. And maybe some of the experiences you've had with commissioning works or working with composers. Just how does that new music experience work with you?
Well, there's a broad aspect to that too. What you do when you deal with new music or commissioning music or contemporary music is you're telling the players in your group that being a part of what's happening is important, not just being a part of what has happened. You're part of the future. And I think that example is crucial. I would much rather be a part of the future than a part of the past. I'd like to salute the past and spend my time worrying about the future. And you're going to have to put up with some failures in the choice of new music, because you can't be successful at that. There's one person who will remain nameless that I commissioned a piece from, and we never played it. I just didn't think it was worthy of the time we would spend in a rehearsal to play it. We read it, and that was it. But I think usually with my friends, at some place in the conversation, well, what are you playing? What are you playing this year? And then my standard question is, would you play it again? Are you glad you played it? Because sometimes people, say, well, man, this piece is great, and it's with a composer on our faculty. But I want to know the piece that's not by a composer on their faculty, that's something else. So I keep quizzing my friends about this. And so I rely on my friends, and I think they rely on me. And you use everything. I'm a keeper of lists. I love lists. And I make my own lists of music and contemporary music and contemporary art. There's a difference between band composers and real composers. Now there are the few who are the same, but not many, because most people are writing for this purpose. I mean, the CBDNA has just commissioned Aaron Kernis to write a piece. Well, he's won the Pulitzer Prize. Every composer thinks that he's a really terrific composer. William Bolcom just wrote a symphony for band. I mean, all the composers think that he's a real composer. I want to deal with the real composers. When Michael Colgrass, who's a real composer, writes music for younger bands, then I'm really interested in hearing what that is, because he's the real deal. And he's writing a limited thing. So, I mean, the composers that mean something to you. So who won the Pulitzer Prize this year? Who was the first Pulitzer Prize winner? Who are the major composers in the world today? You should all know that. So it's experimentation and failure. And I haven't been happy with every piece we've done that's been new. But I keep trying to do that. I mean, there were a lot of people who wrote during Mozart's time. A composer who was maybe as famous or maybe more famous than Mozart was Ditters von Dittersdorf. Now, how much von Dittersdorf do we play these days? Nothing. And so that may happen to you as you get a new piece. The other thing I would encourage you to do is maybe have an interaction with a composer in your group. And usually, if there's a college that's not terribly far away, they'll have a composer on it or a theory teacher, and listen to some music and say, I'd like you to write a piece, and what would it cost, and so forth. And then, but I'd like you to come over as you begin the piece and listen to the band. I'd like you to come over partway through and 2/3 of the way through and talk to the group about what you're doing and how you're doing it, so they can kind of get into this whole what the conception is and the music making process. Any of those things you can do would be great. But keep at the new music stuff, not as a steady diet, but all the time there needs to be something like that.
Anyone else?
You recounted the story of the red sweater and your first year of teaching. And I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit to your journey of discovering your own path rather than following the models that you had been exposed to previously.
Okay, well that was one certainly, and then my second job was Anaheim High School, and we began to be pretty good. In Southern California there was a thing called the competition parades, and they had competition field shows, like halftime, like drum corps are now, but there were no drum corps then. So we began to do pretty well. We began to win some things and place high and so forth, and it was I felt very good about that. The group felt very good about that. We were, quote, successful. Now, whether we were successful musicians or not is another story, but we were winning trophies. And so we got a lot of accolades about that. And then there was an Orange County section of the LA Times, and every fall they would come out with, the best cheerleaders and the best this, and they would also have the best band. And we won that a couple years in a row, the best band in Orange County. Then I got to fantasizing in my head about this, and maybe there would be a best band in California, and then a best band in the Western United States, and then a best band in the United States, and a best band in the world, and a best intergalactic band, or whatever that was. And I thought, and then what? And then after we've won everything, then what? Then what's of value? And at that point, as I was ruminating about that, I was trying to read everything I could to be the best conductor I could. So there were books coming out, and I was reading them. And one book I picked up, because he was by a famous conductor, was a book called Of Music and Music Making by Bruno Walter. because he was a famous conductor, and I wanted to find out what made him tick. And boy, it just knocked me flat, his philosophy. And that, as much as anything, turned my head, because he talked about, you know, if your rehearsals are filled with intimidation, the players who are going to play for completely different reasons. They're going to be mad at it, or they're going to be intimidated by it. And neither one of those things are compatible with really aesthetic music making. And that made a lot of sense to me. And I kept reading about that. And I mean, he just had one zinger in there after another. So that combination of things kind of changed me.
Anyone else before we wrap it up? Good. Rich?
On the board, you have your growth chart in terms of depth that conductor brings to each piece of music. And we're all at some level on that growth chart. And you mentioned Carlos Kleiber and some other great conductors and musicians that are some of the best. How does one go about increasing their depth as a musician, as an artist? It can't be just because of the amount of time we spend in our careers. It's what we do during that
Right.
time period. And what kind of things can we do to grow as a musician?
It's experiences that are going to do that, more than anything else, more than reading, actually. I mean, I think you should read, and I think you should spend a lot of time with nature, but it's really going to be the experience, the seeking out of the really great concerts. And don't just go to band concerts. In fact, band concerts would be the least, because you know too much. Again, you know too much about that. I would go to the great, if there's, it's Itzhak Perlman we're playing, you know, or Yo-Yo Ma we're playing. Okay, so you're going to spend $100 for that ticket, but it's going to be worth it. I remember going to a concert with Jesse Norman. One of my prized recordings is Jesse Norman singing the 4 last songs of Strauss with the Gewandhaus Orchestra conducted by Kurt Masur. And one time, the Gewandhaus Orchestra came to Ann Arbor, Michigan. And Jessie Norman was at Ann Arbor, was a University of Michigan grad, and she was singing with them, and they were singing the 4 last songs of Strauss. And I was scared to death that the concert was going to be a big disappointment, because I loved the recording so much. And I went to the concert, and the concert was better than the recording. And I went out of there believing that I was a better musician and deeper musician than when I walked in the door 2 hours before. It's going for the gusto of the most important musical and life experiences. That's the biggest deal of all. And then, I mean, there's another weird thing about, there's conducting workshops are going on around the country constantly. And the weird thing about these conducting workshops is they're all really good. I don't know of a bad conducting workshop. One at Northwestern is great, one at Michigan is great, Colorado, Texas, Cincinnati. I mean, they're all terrific, with terrific people at them. You've got to be growing constantly. So I would do one of those a year, 2 if you can. You can just pick the people you want to be with. But anything you can seek out to make that growth happen, because you can't sit around. You can't grow passively. You have to be active in the engagement, aggressively active in growth, or it doesn't happen.
Anyone else? Okay, hang on. We're going to put the cap on this then, all right? Or at least this part of it.
Whatever you say, sir.
Whatever you say. First of all, I mean, thank you for the incredible amount of information that's been shared in a short amount of time. As we're leaving this, as you look to the future for our profession, what thoughts do you have about where we should go and where we should focus, and where's this band thing going to go?
Where's the band thing going to go? Well, hopefully it's what I said earlier. We're going to start making music more than we start making perfection, because it's very hard to do both. It has to be good so that it doesn't interfere with the music making process. But none of us listen to music because we're listening for perfection. We're listening for heartfelt music. And so the bands have got to be more a part of that. We've got to kind of wean ourselves away from the contest mentality. We've got to win, we've got to be better. We've got to be more in the high school in Madison, Wisconsin. Why do we go to festival? We could bring somebody in to do something. But he wanted to play well too, otherwise they wouldn't be playing Hammersmith.
Absolutely.
So it's a music-making thing, and that's our last frontier. I think if we can get over that hurdle, will be great, because the choral people are over it. Choral people make music because they want to make music. The orchestra people make music because they want to make music. But they weren't as indoctrinated with the band contest as we have been. But we're working ourselves out of it. But the bands play great. I mean,
Any last thoughts you'd like to share before we?
oh, it's been nerve-wracking, I would say, to do this. It may not seem it, but I felt I had one chance to say what I wanted to say, and this was it. And if I didn't get it said, I would forever regret it. But so I guess I don't want to go back and look at my notes to see what I didn't say. But thank you for the opportunity.
No, thank you. Let's thank this gentleman.